Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Wednesday. It is the 22nd day of February in the year 2017. I think I said yesterday that yesterday was the 20th. It was actually the 21st. So I lost a day there, but I gained it back. It's amazing how quick that goes, how quick you can do that. But anyway, a little bit dreary today, but temperatures remains warm. It's above 50, so I think most people that I talk to will take that. Just on a personal note, and this is really, please don't anybody react to this, but I just got so excited. My wife tells me that when it comes to this, I'm like a kid. But yesterday in the mail, my brother sent me a New England Patriots Super Bowl champion hat. With the 50, number 51 on it, the one that they just won. I got so excited. I've been wearing the thing. I wore it all last evening in the house, and my wife was out. She came in last evening early, and saw the hat, and she said, "Oh my God!" And I said, I'm so excited. I am so excited. And she said, you're just like a little kid when it comes to that. And I said, well, every other part of me ain't like a kid anymore, but I appreciate that anyway. So I'm really excited. I've been a fan of that team, obviously, since it started. I grew up in New England. So I grew up in Boston when they were the Boston Patriots. And at that time, you could afford to go to games. So I went to a number of preseason games and all that before it became so expensive that you couldn't do it anymore. But I've remained a fan, and as most people, I think even people that hate the Patriots have acknowledged that this last Super Bowl was something very special. So I'm wearing this hat proudly, and my brother said, make sure that nobody down there kills you now, because I know that's Pittsburgh Steeler country. But anyway, welcome to today's program on this Wednesday. I do invite you to share your thoughts and your ideas about some of the things that are going on. There's so much. Tonight, for example, on MSNBC at 10 o'clock, there's a special that's on from 10 to midnight with all the MSNBC hosts, Rachel Maddow and Chris Matthews and the rest of them on the first month of the Trump presidency. And it's just, people are spending time analyzing the first month of this presidency. The implications, of course, are incredible because obviously there are 11 more months to go in the first year and theoretically 3 more years after that, at least. So, whether in fact the pace of activity can remain at the level that it's been happening is a little bit uncertain. But anyway, there's so much attention, so much media attention and all of that it's, for people that do get into politics a little bit, it's keeping the junkies happy, I guess I could say. We would love to hear from you. I know that. And I know the folks at Head On Radio would like to hear from you as well. We have a phone number, and it'll take you directly into the studios. Bob Kincaid is there. I just chatted with him before we came on the air, and he will get you immediately on the air if you just pick up the phone and call area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you're a little bit uncomfortable about going on the air, but at the same time you feel like you've got something to say that people might benefit from, and I appreciate the fact that that's more than likely true. If you're a listener of the Head On Radio Network, and especially in today's world, chances are that if you are inclined to say something, it's something that other people ought to hear. But if you're reluctant to get on the air, and I can understand that, then by all means feel free to send me an email, and I'll do the best I can by you to get your thoughts or your concerns or whatever on the air so that our other listeners can benefit from hearing them and have an opportunity to react to you and to them. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And I do recommend and alert you to our Facebook page. We've been actually, I think I've been pretty good at increasing the number of postings and the number of comments on issues that I've been putting on Facebook. I've become a fairly proficient user of Facebook in the 8, 9, 10 months, whatever it happens to be that I've been using it. And although I didn't put anything additional on Facebook last evening, since yesterday's program, I did put a number of items and issues on our Facebook page over this past weekend. So I do encourage you to take a moment. I know I've had a couple of emails from folks who said they spent a couple of hours going back over the Facebook page and just reading or just going over all the postings that are there, and in some cases reacting to them. And I really appreciate that. If you're a regular user of Facebook, you know how easy it is. You just go to facebook.com, which is the homepage, and there's a search box there. And if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you'll be onto our Facebook page, and you will get the various postings and links to what I think are important articles that you might find interesting. I hope you will. The last couple, we spent time in yesterday's program dealing with a couple of the recent postings that are there. And again, I don't want to take any time from today's program going over what we did yesterday, but I do recommend the piece that we spent quite a bit of time on for the second portion of yesterday's program. And if you recall, it is Robert Zaretsky's a review or synopsis, if you will, of Guy Debord's book from about a half century ago on the Society of Spectacles. And it deals with the extent to which the world that we live in has changed in perspective, and that more and more of us have been relegated for various reasons into observers of the world we live in, as opposed to being participants in it. And of course, what Robert Zaretsky was trying to do in raising this issue was linking it directly to not only the Donald Trump campaign for president, but also the first month of his administration.
Hey,
and
Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob?
Could I interrupt for a moment? You've got
sure
Ian
can.
on the line from Southern West Virginia.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Ian.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, buddy?
I am great, sir. I just noticed that you had sent me an email this morning. I didn't have a chance to even read it yet because I just glanced at my email account before I came on the air, and there you were. So how have you been?
I'm doing good. About like you with the weather. It's raining here and a little bit dreary, but doing well. I actually listen to the show, by the way, and it's really hard to hear you. I don't know if you can hear me all that well. This is the first time I've ever called into a radio show, so I apologize for my apprehension, and you can probably feel a little bit of anxiety in my voice maybe. But I had a few things I wanted to talk about. And
please
first
do.
First of all, thank you for the show. The reason I really haven't called in before is because it's more like I look at it as almost like a college curriculum. I learned so much from your show, and I've tried to listen back through the archives of a lot of your shows, and I've learned so much. I really don't want to interrupt your show a lot of the time, and I hope I'm not interrupting today. But anyway, I had a few things to go over.
First of all, you're not. First of all, I want to thank you for your kind comments and you're never interrupting. I need to say that. It's very difficult because, I did teach college for many years, and my presentation is such that it sounds like a lecture, and by definition, that makes it difficult for people to interject because they feel like they're interrupting something. And the fact of the matter is, if there's a caller that has something to say, it always receives priority. It is always the priority item because that's really what we're about. But first of all, you sound good. I can hear you well. And don't worry about your hesitance of being on the air. You sound great.
All right. Well, thank you. And basically what I called in about, I'm 40 years old, and I'm a late bloomer to education. I'm in school now, trying to obtain a bachelor's degree, and I'm in southern West Virginia with all the, I guess, negative and positive connotations that come along with that.
Right.
I live in a little town called Man. I don't know if you've heard of Man. It's basically just west of Raleigh County there in Beckley, and I was in Beckley yesterday.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, I've really started paying attention to politics, and a lot of other things in my life have changed. I tell everybody that years ago I was pretty conservative. I watched Fox News all the time and bought into a lot of the ideology that came along with that. And I even thought, O'Reilly, I kind of looked up to him. But things have changed over the years, and as I've educated myself a little more liberally, and I wouldn't say an autodidact, but I've tried to learn and study on my own things. My views have obviously changed.
Mm-hmm.
The big thing here in West Virginia is now that I have the liberal leanings that I do, it's kind of hard to fit in. It seems like very conservative, very red state.
Yeah, you're kind of like me, Ian. I know what you mean. You're kind of progressive in your thinking, and you feel, and suddenly you find out that nobody around here really wants to hear that. So.
Yeah, it's hard to find anyone really to talk to, and in all honesty, when you try to discuss a lot of these things, there's a lot of people that get angry, and they don't want to be challenged on a lot of ideas, I find, and that's rather unfortunate, I think, because there's no way to really progress as a society without talking. I was, I always try to lean things back towards history the way you do, and I'm currently reading the autobiography of Ben Franklin, and he talks about juntos and being a club and basically having big ideas and discussions and discourse. They didn't all agree back then, obviously,
right.
But they all had good discourse, and they had good ideas, and they proffered all the facts, and good things came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I really agree with you, and I think people that have listened to the program for a long time understand the degree to which I do agree with you. I think that's one of the most important things for people to appreciate about the early period of the founding, and that is that when people say the founders believed this and the founders believed that, the fact of the matter is each of them believed a certain thing, but the way they learned and the way they continued to grow is through discussion and dialogue. You're exactly right. And that's really what they talked about. I can remember a letter from John Adams, and basically he made the very specific point that he's speaking for himself, but he talks about a lot of his colleagues as well. And he says, truth is not discovered, truth is not inherited, truth is discovered. And basically what that means is it requires effort on our part to pursue the truth. And basically, truth just isn't revealed to you. You have to find it. And that's really what he believed and what he claimed the rest of them believed as well. And as I've read the letters over the years, I pretty well agree with that. I think you're right on, Ian.
Yeah, and that leads me into my first point that I really wanted to discuss to you, and that's ideology. And I've struggled with that myself, and I think you've hit on that a few times here lately about things that make you feel good. And obviously, I think everyone has a bias, as do I. But I try to recognize my bias, and I try to maybe get around it. But that's really hard to do. And I think it's important to not become an ideologue. which you can obviously do. And I found myself going down that road, and more instances than not. And I point towards some of the problems. We've had a huge swing to the right. And we even looked at Marine Le Pen and stuff like that overseas. And I think there's a big switch to the right with conservatism and nationalism and all those things that come with that.
Yes.
And I think she may actually win in France, and it's a scary prospect. Even Angela Merkel, and I think they're even probably in a little bit of a damage control and maybe trying to catch up and to not be defeated, in their elections. But in liberalism, I think we've all my personal view on it is we're open to all ideas, and we should be welcome to discuss all those ideas and truly look for those facts and try not to shut down discussion. I think a lot of liberals have pushed the opposite direction in past years, and we've even seen this recently with Milo Yiannopoulos, and I'm sure I'm not saying that name right, but I know that
we know who you mean, though.
Yeah, and he's kind of Breitbart News, and he's a shock jock, I guess, and likes to say some crazy things. But, the colleges tried to shut him down, or people at colleges tried to shut him down and not let him proffer his speech and things like that. And I think that's wrong. I think we shouldn't attack. It's ad hominem attacks, I think. That we shouldn't go after the person, but I think we should be able to go after the ideas. And if we're intelligent enough, we can attack those ideas and shut those ideas down and proffer our own ideas, that are better. Right.
When you talk about ideology, of course, you're right, because we do naturally tend to slide in to a set of ideological preferences over time, I think. And the danger to that, in fact, I mentioned this on the program yesterday, the danger there is that as we slide into a worldview that becomes more and more comfortable to us, we tend to look for people whose positions agree with our own rather than people whose positions disagree with us. So when you said that you began, you were a regular listener of Fox News, and that becomes very comfortable. And if that's where you get all of your news, then you really don't have the opportunity to challenge your own ideological biases. And so it's very difficult because education to really happen, somehow we've got to be confronted with contradictions between what we believe and alternatives. And if we just look for people who agree with us and dismiss out of hand those who don't, then I really do believe that we become more solid, more fixed in our ideological biases to the point that we become intolerant. And I think that's what you're talking about. I think there's a tendency and a development of intolerance, which is very, very dangerous. Granted, a lot of the things that we hear people saying are offensive. But on the other hand, the best way to deal with them is to refute them, not silence them or censor them or anything like that. I think I do agree with you on that, Ian.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I meant. I don't mean to be offensive in any way, but that's exactly what I mean. I hate to try to just shut someone down and say and attack the person that's making some kind of a point. And I'd rather just take on the ideas. And I think that a lot of people are bad about that as of late. And it's social media. You see that on Facebook. I see it's easy to attack someone on Facebook, but it's different to have dialogue face-to-face. And I think more people need to do that. I think more people need to have those discussions face-to-face. And right now it seems like almost most people are fearful of doing those things. I try not to be. I try to have discussions. A lot of times they don't go well, but I think it's good to try to have those discussions.
I think you're right, and I really do. I'm so appreciative of the fact that you've chosen to call. I know that you told me in the previous email you wrote, they said that with your work schedule and such, you found it very, very difficult to find the time to do anything like this. So I'm really thrilled that you're on the line with us today.
Yeah, yeah, just a little bit about me. I've got 3 kids that I'm raising. I'm 40 years old. I just graduated from the University of Charleston recently I'm an RN, so I work 2 full-time jobs. I work for AirVac on a helicopter, and then I work part-time in the ICU here at Logan. So it's busy all the time, and I'm doing a bachelor's program. So yeah, it's pretty busy. But I just have one more thought if you have time.
That's pretty busy. Go right ahead.
And I think that you've alluded to this, and I believe that you actually ran head on to this in your campaign, and I'm sorry that you didn't do better, by the way. I really had hope that you could, and I think you stood to some values that probably weren't so liked among some of the constituents there in your area, and I do apologize for that. I think
you're right. I think I mean, when I've concluded, I ran up against. I guess I didn't really realize how strong the opposition to the things that I support are or have become in West Virginia, and I really do believe it's not their fault, and I do believe it's the fault of others who previously in the recent past have not stood up for those principles and those values. As a lifelong Democrat, which I have been, I grew up. My dad taught me from the very beginning that being a Democrat wasn't just a label. It wasn't just a word. That it had meaning, and it stood for things, and it had principles. And I can remember one time, and I've used this in some of my literature during the campaign. My dad told me straight up, and he said, people talk all the time about the Bible and about the Golden Rule. And he said, the fact of the matter is the Democratic Party is the institution that probably comes closest to standing for what the Golden Rule is all about than anything else. And I really, really accepted that, and I really bought into that. And I tried to put it in my campaign. And I really believe that when you say you're a Democrat, that means, it ought to mean, that you're for certain things, and that you like Republicans, you see the necessity of government. But the difference is you don't see government's principal job as to protect institutions. Government's principal job is to represent and protect the interest of people. And that's kind of what I believe. And unfortunately, I find that's not that prevalent in this area. And perhaps it's going to start becoming that. I do hope so. But I thank you for your comments about the campaign. I honestly learned an awful lot from it. I felt very, very good about the fact that, that I did do pretty well. Not well enough, obviously, but I didn't get skunked necessarily. And I had a lot of people that believed strongly in some of the things I was saying, and I appreciate the heck out of that. So thank you, Ian, very much.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm truly fearful that the Democratic Party has kind of veered away from being a party of the people, because you're absolutely right, and that's what I stand for now. And they backed the unions back in the day, and the history of West Virginia with the unions and the coal mines and how all that has played out, and it's fundamental to the Democratic Party, but in this state, and I'm fearful that I see it in other states as well, that they're veering away from that, and it's more, like Hillary's campaign was not just for the people. She didn't run. She basically ran against somebody instead of running for something, is how I saw it. And she didn't run for the people. And I voted for Bernie, and I'll not, I'll fully disclose that. And then I did end up voting for Hillary, obviously against Trump, because we don't even need to go there.
You're not going to believe this, but this morning, early this morning, in fact, I mentioned this to Bob Kincaid before we came on the air today. I mentioned to Bob, and I said, Bob, did you ever get something that's eating at you so much that you almost felt like you had to say it? You had to put it down on paper? And he said, oh, yeah. And I felt that way. And so this morning I put together a piece on about the Democrats here, mainly here in West Virginia, but nationally as well. And the title I put on it is "Where Are They?" You know, where are the Democrats? And much of what I said in that, I was gonna, you know, you called, and I'm so thankful you did. But the first item that I had on the agenda today was I was going to share that particular piece of writing that just, you know, it's fresh off the press. I just wrote it a couple of hours ago. It almost exactly mirrors what you're saying right now. I think you'll be surprised, because when we end our conversation, I want to get to that, and okay. It's going to be ironic as all get out, because you won't believe it, but it's just so ironic that you would call and say those things today, because that's essentially what I'm going to be talking about as the first item of business in today's program. But go ahead. I don't want to short you at all.
Yeah. So just one more point, and this I fear is going to be taken, and I'm not going to try to be offensive, but it is offensive to a lot of people, and I have different religious views than probably 99% of West Virginia, and I think a lot of what you ran into, and you spoke about this once before, I truly see across the country, and I think Trump has seized on this, and I think the Republican Party has almost taken over the Christian culture and evangelism. And I think they would have it, and I see it all around. They say that they want, you know, I hear people say that they want prayer back in school, and they want kids to be taught the Bible and all these things, and I think that opens up a huge can of worms. You know, I'm very secular, and I think I look at the Constitution. There's about 4,500 words in the Constitution, and there's not a single one of them that says God, Jesus, or Christianity, or any of those things.
No, that's right.
I think they were very clear, you know, the First Amendment, and I think others expounded on that idea that there should be a definite wall between, you know, church and state. And I don't know your opinion on that, and I'd like to hear some of your opinion about that. But, you know, and they point to all kinds of things, and they say that this was a Christian nation, and they look at our money, and they say it's in God we trust is our motto, and all those things. And I point out some of the obvious that, you know, before 1954, it was the pluribus unum. And I point out, you know, the Treaty of Tripoli that was signed by Adams back in 1797 that straight up says that this country was not founded on the Christian religion.
Right.
And all those things. But I think that it's almost like it's taken hostage, and it plays into the religious views of a lot of people in this country. And I think that's really almost like an invasive species in our country that's trying to take over and be more conservative and push further to the right. And
right.
I'd like to hear your points on that. I think some may find that offensive, me saying those things. And
no, I don't think.
I think
no.
That you should have an open mind and think those things through.
Well, you know, thank you, and I do. We have talked about that a couple of times here. I tend to be on this particular subject. I tend to be very, very much in the corner with James Madison in his principled statement on religious freedom that was developed in Virginia in the 1786, I believe, in which he talked about the fact that whenever religion enters government at all, or whenever government takes a position on any issue that is a matter of conscience, by definition, it interferes with somebody's freedom, somebody else's religious freedom. The only way, Adams said, that you can have true religious freedom for everybody in a society in which people are not all of the same faith is to keep government out of it. And government essentially must leave to conscience those things that belong to conscience and are things that individuals need to wrestle with and need to decide on for themselves. And I really do believe that. The founders, you're right. When Jefferson's comment, Jefferson was a deist, which is is touted or talked about as being the religion of the Enlightenment. basically what deism is an effort to try to bring together the extremes of religiosity on one hand and secularism on the emphasis on reason on the other. And that really ties into something we talked about a few minutes ago, and that is about Adams's comment about the idea that truth is not revealed, it's discovered. And basically, it's man's reason that leads him on that path to discovery. And that's the basis of deism, and that's the basis on which founders in the 18th century believed it. In other words, it was not a rejection of Christianity at all. It was man's effort to try to understand Christianity in the real world. Yeah. And that essentially was the response. So their argument was that they were not anti-religion or anti-God or anything else. Jefferson believed in a creator. He says that in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's one thing to believe in a creator. It's something else to believe that the creator, after the creator creates you, maintains total control over everything you think and everything you do. And the fact of the matter is, God gave you a mind, Jefferson and many of the others believed, and your job was to use that mind and try to figure out the world, the kingdom that the Creator had made available to us. That's our challenge. That's what we're about. The ability to get along with each other, the ability to take and appreciate and improve the environment in which we find ourselves. And all of this other stuff is the exact opposite of that. It's, I would argue, in a real sense, it almost constitutes anti-Christianity because it's so offensive to many. First of all, it's offensive to human beings themselves and their ability to think and their ability to reason and their ability to figure things out for themselves and to understand. That's really what, it seems to me, the pursuit of truth is all about. And to demean people and suggest to people, you don't have to think, you don't have to be educated. All you need to do is wait and have truth revealed to you. It's frightening because the assumption is once that truth is revealed to you and you accept it, then you don't have to think about anything anymore. You just take your marching orders from somebody else. You're, in essence, a puppet of a whole set of ideas that aren't your own. And I definitely reject that. So that's kind of where I am on that.
And that's my point of it. I think that instead of it being offensive to the Christians or to the Muslims or any other sect of religion that's in our country, we ought to see secularism as being not an opponent, but an ally. Because, I mean, once you allow one religion in, I think it would just be invasive to our democracy. And you're right, it would be offensive to so many others. You know, it's interesting, you talked about Thomas Jefferson. The Thomas Jefferson Bible was handed out in Congress, I think, up until the early 1900s. And he basically went through and carved out everything that he didn't believe in the Bible, which was basically all of the miracles and all those things. And that was handed out in Congress. I don't have one of those. I've not seen one, but I've read about it.
Yes.
And it was handed out through the years and was accepted.
Right.
Yeah,
well, and it's interesting. Bob was telling me before we came on the air, I didn't know this, but Bob was telling me in Charleston that the Republican majority is introducing legislation to make the Bible the official book of West Virginia.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to mention because I read that on WSEZ.com this morning. That yes, that bill was introduced.
I hadn't seen it. I'm absolutely stunned by it. Absolutely stunned.
Well, other states have done this too. I think Tennessee just recently tried this as well, but I think it failed. But I'm not sure that it will here, and I'm not sure how that will play out. I don't know. But and here's my point was of all this. I think this leads to the anti-intellectualism that you speak of, and other things, because when we have like Senator Jim Inhofe, he walks in, and throws a snowball on the ground and says, "What what climate change. And we have other senators saying that it's impossible for us to change our environment because God wills the environment. You know, who are we as human beings to change our environment? It's not possible. So that leads to anti-intellectualism, I think, even with evolution that's taught in schools and all the things that we see against science. And I think it truly stems from some of these things, and that's what I would like to hear you expound on.
Right.
And that's my last point, and I thank you for your time.
Ian, thank you so much for the call. What a fabulous way to start a Wednesday. Thank you so much.
All right. And you have a good day. I look forward to listening to the rest of the program.
Thank you, Ian. The anti-intellectualism theme, of course, my first introduction to that was Richard Hofstadter's book on anti-intellectualism in America. And there is a pattern throughout of anti-intellectualism. And, of course, we're seeing it now with the administration that's in office. We're seeing a president who actually brags about the fact that he doesn't read and that he functions or reacts or makes decisions based on his gut rather than on research, rather than on data. He doesn't want to know. He doesn't have time for the repetitious waste of time that these briefing sessions by the intelligence agencies end up to be, he felt. So in a sense, what he's doing is giving his official imprimatur, if you will, his official vote of approval to anti-intellectualism. And basically what we're seeing in our society today is people seriously questioning the reality of truth, basically throwing up their hands and say there's so many different competing ideas around that it's impossible to know which of them is true. Maybe none of them are. Maybe there is no truth. And so it's a total rejection of absolutes, rights and wrongs and all the rest of it. And the irony of that is that if you go back to the 80s and the closing of the American mind by Alan Bloom, that was the major conservative intellectual argument of the late 20th century, was that liberals had taken the nation, had taken us in a direction which was making relativism the dominant theme of our entire educational establishment. That what we were doing was convincing young people that there really isn't a truth. There really aren't rights and wrongs and goods and bads. That rather it's all a matter of perspective. Truth is relative. It depends on how you look at it. And Bloom took us to task as a culture for our inclination to do that. And his argument was, and the title of his book was, that this, in his mind, constituted the closing of the American mind. We had stopped thinking. We had stopped searching. We had stopped trying to pursue understanding. And now we have Republicans, at least people with R's after their name, although I really don't know that they fully understand what it is they are or what it is they're not. But the fact of the matter is they reject all of this. In other words, they've taken the criticism that Alan Bloom put together in the 1980s, and they've taken it to the next step. And basically, they are rejecting the value of reading, research, intellectualism, dialogue, negotiation. Ian talked about the Constitution and his faith in and support for the Constitution of the United States. The one thing you can't get away from when you look at the Constitution is that it's based on all of these things, on negotiation, on dialogue, on compromise, on the ability of thinking people in pursuit of truth or in pursuit of doing what's right to get together and find ways to accomplish things. And everything we're doing in today's political world seems contrary to that, and therefore contrary to the Constitution of the United States. And that's what this program is about, the study of the Constitution of the United States. And there's no question our Constitution is in trouble. It's under attack. And the fact of the matter is, we're dealing with a population that really has stopped thinking and trying to understand, which means that they can't really appreciate what's at stake during these questions and these kinds of dialogues. So that that really, it seems to me, is what we're about. Let me just again thank Ian for his call. I found it first of all incredibly insightful, and I want to thank you for it. Many of the things that you raise are right in the wheelhouse here. They're what we're about, and I appreciate that. I will say, on a personal note, and Ian talked a little bit about himself, I met Ian last year when I was a patient in the local hospital here. He was a nursing student at the University of Charleston. He's since graduated from there with his RN, he told us. And he was there working, doing on-the-job, as part of an on-the-job class that they had as part of the curriculum. I was a patient, and I got to know him, and we kind of clicked. And I know that he would spend extra time if he had 15 minutes or so. He'd come in and we'd sit and chat and talk about different things. And I alerted him to this program and what we were trying to do with it and those kinds of things. And then I had lost touch with him, but now I understand why. He's raising 3 kids, and he's pursuing a doctorate degree and working a full-time job and all the rest of it. But I think every once in your life you connect with somebody, you come across somebody that has a real impact on your life. And I got to say that in mine, Ian is one. My wife and I have shared. I told my wife all about when she came in about him, and we've talked. I'll mention his call to her today, because she was very, very interested in Ian and the fact that I had met him in the hospital, and we had clicked so well, and I thought so much of him, and I just appreciated the fact that there are people like that that we run into, and we don't know they're out there, and when we meet one, we really have to relish it, and I do. So, Ian, thank you very much for the call. I kind of set this up in the conversation with Ian, and that is this piece that I wrote this morning on Where Are the Democrats? And it fits perfectly into one of the issues that Ian raised. And I told him he would be struck by the irony of the fact that he called on this particular subject today, because this was something that I felt compelled to do this morning. So I sat down and I did it. And it ties directly back to the campaign, the political campaign that I was in the fall of this past year. So let me kind of share it with you. And then as we move towards the top of our first hour here, we're about 45 minutes in, I think. We've probably got 15 or 16 minutes left in this, our first hour. So this is a good way to make this the closing item, if you will, for our first hour of today's program. So if you'll bear with me, it's not long. I think you'll get the point, and then we can kind of discuss it later. The title of this is Where Are the Democrats? The political climate in Washington and here in West Virginia is strikingly similar. Democrats in neither place are very visible. In fact, they're hardly a meaningful factor in either place. As he did during the campaign, President Trump continues to suck most of the oxygen out of the political air there. Here in West Virginia, Jim Justice does likewise. The only Democratic office holder of any significance in West Virginia, the governor promises to be the sole source of whatever initiative we can expect from Democrats. In the meantime, our most visible Democrat, Joe Manchin, seems almost to be laying low. In a week when Congress took a President's Day recess to touch base with constituents, he slipped ever so quietly into Peterstown in Monroe County for a town hall that really wasn't that at all. Word has it that attendees were handpicked, though some others who heard about the event apparently showed up. In any case, it was unlike so many other such events around the country that turned contentious over an event-filled first month of Donald Trump's presidency. With nearly 1/3 of the legislative session here in West Virginia already in the books, one wonders where Democrats are hiding. In the wake of a series of devastating election defeats, Democrats in West Virginia have lost control of both houses, every major state office with the exception of the governorship, every legislative seat in Washington save Joe Manchin's, even much of the leverage on the West Virginia Supreme Court. And while Manchin and Justice both have D's after their name, it wouldn't be hard to make a case that both are really Republicans. In fact, one could argue that here in West Virginia, most office holders listed as Democrats are really Republicans. The point? West Virginia needs Democratic leadership, real leadership from real Democrats. At last year's June state convention, West Virginia's Democrats adopted what was then the most progressive pro-people platform in the nation. As a candidate for the legislature, I was proud to embrace it as a new day for the Democratic Party in this state. Little did I know, little could I believe, that so few real Democrats were with me. In fact, I found myself in more than a few heated discussions with incumbent Democrats over just this, the platform. What we must do, they argued, is win. Nothing else matters if we don't win. So what we have to do is tie our coattails to the Justice campaign, bring coal back, recreate and reinvigorate West Virginia's past, and return to business as usual in this state. As a result, the platform was ignored, never mentioned. No time to educate voters on that, incumbents argued. What we must do is win the way we've always won, on the issues that have always done it for us. That we as Democrats seemed to stand for nothing didn't seem to matter. That we were totally out of step with the progressive past that has always defined Democrats didn't seem to matter either. Somehow, Democrats were able to deny the Bernie Sanders agenda in our state and the thousands of young people who were flocking to his standard. The final straw was at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. Even though Bernie had won the Democratic primary in West Virginia, our party leadership cast the state's votes for Hillary. We were denying not only Bernie, not only the thousands he invigorated, but the history of our own party and the president who headed it. And here we are. The road to a rebound is clear. A pro-people agenda that can get us there is already in place. So I close with the same question I opened with. Where are the Democrats? This is a piece that I intend to post on Facebook after our program is over today. I didn't put it on there as yet because, to be honest with you, I just finished it a few minutes before we came on the air. But it's ironic because it's so close to the things that Ian was talking about in his conversation some moments ago. It's an issue that bothers me deeply. I always believed, and I don't want to keep repeating myself, that being a Democrat is more than a political label, it's more than a party. It's a set of principles. It's a set of ideals. And they happen to be the ideals that are most important to me. They speak to issues related to people, to doing good for others, to helping out your fellow man, to doing everything you can to walk in the other fellow's shoes in order to understand. Not just to be sympathetic, not just to do good in charitable purposes, but in essence to relate to other people. to try to understand where they're coming from, what they are, what their problems are, and whether in fact there might be a way that you can do anything to help them out. Because that is, I believe, what happiness, personal happiness, is really all about. I subscribe to Jefferson's view of the pursuit of happiness as he understood it in the 18th century. Happiness isn't what you can do for yourself. Happiness is what you can do for other people. Jefferson believed that. He said it in so many different ways, in so many different places. I subscribe to it. It's where I am. It's where my parents were. My dad was there. Reading Jefferson and reflecting on what he was saying and what he obviously meant by what he says helped me understand my own parents. Helped me understand where my dad was coming from all of those years when frequently I couldn't understand. I just didn't know. And he, God love him, he didn't really have the opportunity to explain it. He just felt it. In that sense, he was like Donald Trump. He was operating from his gut. The only difference is his gut was leading him in a totally different direction, I believe. But that's really where I'm from. And so when I came here and registered as a Democrat, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a party that put its people first, that looked upon government as an opportunity to fulfill the American dream for people. More specifically, make it possible for people to pursue the American dream for themselves. Make sure they had an education. Make sure they had food. Make sure they had a roof over their head. Make sure they had an adequate meal and proper nourishment. Make sure that they had a shot at a good education, not just an education, but a good one. Not just an education which would teach them enough only to believe, but an education which would cause them to begin to pursue truth and look for answers, raise questions, and pick up or learn the skills necessary to find answers to those questions. That's what I believe Democrats were always about. That's what I believe FDR was about. That's what I believe Thomas Jefferson was about. I don't see it. I don't see it on the national level, with a few exceptions. I don't see it on the state level here at all. This point that I made in the piece that I wrote about the professed need to win, we can't do anything until we get in there. The fact of the matter is, if you don't stand for anything, if you're not giving people the reason to support you, then you don't have a right to get in. You haven't earned it. It seems to me that that's the kind of leadership that we need in this state. What I didn't say in the piece I wrote, but what I will say now, is the road to recovery, the answer. Democrats are invisible. They clearly are in hiding because most of the initiative here in West Virginia and on the national level is with Republicans. In state after state after state, Democrats are in retreat. The principles they stand for are in retreat. The only way that they can recover, the only way that they can dig their heels in and reverse the direction in which things are going, is to begin to champion the principles which they ought to stand for, the principles that got them to be the party that they have been. If they want to come back and restore where they were, they've got to adopt once more the principles that initially got them there. I truly believe that. I think rather than be in hiding, we need our Democrats to get out there more than ever. We need our Democrats now to begin preparing for the 2018 legislative elections here in West Virginia. We need to begin the process of educating a state that is currently down. Its people are down. We're facing a $500 million budget shortfall. The debates over the budget in the legislature are just beginning to crank up. Do we tax, or do we cut? Or do we try to do a mixture of the two? Those are the decisions that people are making. But the fact of the matter is, and on this, Governor Jim Justice is absolutely right, just balancing the budget for this session doesn't solve the problem. It merely postpones it until next year when it'll be bigger. What we've got to do is rediscover our commitment to people. We've got to begin to educate people. We've got to begin to turn this economy around. We've got to be able to get people involved in turning the state around. We've got to give them hope, and we've got to give them the equipment they need to fulfill that hope. That's what we're about. If we do that, the people will support us, because right now they're standing back and they're waiting for somebody to do something. They don't know what it is. They just hope it'll work. That's why the state has supported Donald Trump so overwhelmingly. He promised to do something. He promised to fix things. Some of us question whether, in fact, he really can fix things. Some of us even question whether, in fact, he cares about fixing things at all. But that's beside the point. People need to begin to take matters back in their own hands. This is a people's government. This is a people's republic. The relationship between government and people in this republic needs to be symbiotic. Both need the other. Each one needs the other. People need government. Government needs people. Somehow we've forgotten that. We have relegated vast numbers of our people to the sidelines. They've become witnesses to what's going on rather than participants. Guy Debord was right in his Society of Spectacles. We have allowed ourselves to be relegated to the status of observers rather than livers in the world we live in. We have got to basically turn that around. In order to do it, we look to our Democratic leadership to do it. So the question, where are the Democrats, is an important one. They need to worry about a lot more than whether to use the filibuster in Washington. They need to worry about a lot more than the next election and taking care or covering or protecting their own legislative seat. They need to get back to leadership. That's what the people wanted. That's what the people expect. That's what the people thought they were getting. And the fact that the people have abandoned them is because they weren't delivering. And they're still not delivering. Even though they're in retreat, they're not delivering. They don't seem to understand that the time is ripe for a reversal. This is a period not of defeat and depression. This is a period of new opportunity. Damn it, let's take it. Anyway, that's what I believe. That has been eating at me for the last 24 hours. I had to basically get it down, and I had to say it. The fact that Ian called and said much the same thing in portion of his call is incredible, because I didn't expect that, and I just think it was absolutely wonderful. We've I don't know if we've reached the top of the hour yet. We're 1 minute away, so we did pretty good. We're going to pause and take our 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with a totally different issue. I want to deal with some of the data and some of the statistics in the report that I mentioned yesterday that comes from Commentary Magazine. I think you'll find it incredibly revealing data. I think it really lays out the situation we're in. If there was ever any question as to why the country voted for someone like Donald Trump, I think this data will explain what indeed did happen. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause for a 5-minute break, and then we'll be right back. Please stay with us. It won't be long. Thank you. Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to our second hour on this Wednesday, the 22nd day of February in the year 2017. Years ago, when I was a student in grade school, this was George Washington's birthday, February 22nd. Lincoln's birthday was the 12th. George Washington's was the 22nd, and we always got the week off. Now we've relegated them all to a Monday President's Day celebration, which creates a long weekend for most people, and that's the way we've come to celebrate it. But when I grew up, it was this whole week from the 12th to the 22nd, that 10-day period, was the period to celebrate the birthdays of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. So when I say February 22nd, it just rings a bell for me, and it's been that way for better than a half century. So welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. In our first hour, if you're just joining us, for the first 3/4 of the hour, pretty much, we had a caller, Ian called, and we shared a number of thoughts about religious freedom and about anti-intellectualism and a number of other things. And then at the end, the last 15, 20 minutes of our first hour was spent in a paper I wrote on raising the question as to where are the Democrats here in West Virginia and in Washington as we look at what's going on through the first month of the Trump campaign and through the first third of the West Virginia legislative session. It almost appears that the Democrats are in retreat or in hiding or something, but they haven't quite come back yet. I don't know that they really know how. It's really interesting throughout much of our recent history, at least. The Republicans have been the out party. They've been the opposition. They've been the minority. Now they are the majority. And there are serious questions being raised about whether, in fact, they know how to govern. They know how to criticize, but do they know how to govern? But I think that same question can be asked of the Democrats. They were in office for so long. Now they're out of office. And it's very clear that they really don't know what it is they're supposed to be doing, it appears. That's really what we talked about in the last quarter, if you will, of our first hour. If you're just joining us, welcome. If you were here for that first hour, I thank you for staying with us. We do invite you to participate with a phone call if you'd like. We have a direct line that'll bring you into the Head On Radio Network studios, and Bob Kincaid, who is in the studio today, will get you on the air as he did with Ian. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me, and I would share with you again that Ian did that. I've received a couple of emails from him in the last week or so. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And again, I alert you to our Facebook page. If you go to Facebook homepage, in the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page, and you will see the various postings that have been put there of late. They are things of mine. Later today, I will be posting the piece on where are the Democrats that I just shared with you at the end of our first hour. I didn't have a chance to post it before we went on the air, but I will make it a point to post it once we leave the air. So again, I think we're shifting gears. I had 3 topics that we were going to cover today, I thought. But as fortune would have it, we were very, very lucky to have Ian call. And so I think probably that's going to reduce us to a couple of issues. The 2 issues that I wanted to raise, and I don't know whether we'll be able to get to both of them, but if we don't, we'll just postpone one until our first program next week. I wanted to get back to the article in commentary that we made reference to yesterday. You remember that I made the point that David Brooks's column in the New York Times yesterday on Tuesday, he writes columns on Tuesdays and Fridays in the New York Times. His Tuesday column was pretty much a synopsis of this detailed report, this research data that was contained in a fairly substantive piece in Commentary Magazine that appeared yesterday. The author of this particular piece in Commentary is Nicholas Eberstadt, Eberstadt, Nicholas N. Eberstadt. The date of publication is February 15th, 2017. And in his article in yesterday's New York Times on the 21st of February, David Brooks devoted his entire column to this particular article. So yesterday, we spent a lot of time looking at the summation or the synopsis of the data that Eberstadt presents to us as compiled by David Brooks. But I mentioned yesterday that I thought, and I continue to believe, I went back over it again this morning, that the data in this particular study is so important that I think anybody that seeks to comment on the world or the nation we are in during the presidency of Donald Trump would necessarily have to look seriously at this data, because there's no question it captures the essence of what we might call the real America. And as we were talking about it in general terms yesterday, focusing principally on David Brooks's column, I mentioned that I wanted to share some of this data with you because I really do believe that it's very significant and it will impress all of us. It will make an impression, and it'll be there should any of us choose to do something or any kind of commentary about today's issues. It seems to me that this data goes a long way towards informing our particular perspective on many of these questions and many of these issues. So with that, let me share with you this particular article. As I mentioned, I reduced it to a Word document so I could print it. It's 9 pages long, single spaced. That's a pretty substantive piece. The data in it is rich. Let me say that Eberstadt's theory or thesis here is based principally on the current situation the nation finds itself in. We are trying to understand the world around us. In fact, in his opening, Eberstadt makes the point that anybody who suddenly awoke on the morning of November 9th, the day after the election, would be stunned to think that this nation elected Donald Trump president of the United States, when all the polls, the media to a fault, was convinced that this election was Hillary Clinton's. And Donald Trump is correct when he speaks to the fact that this is probably one of the most surprising elections. Nobody thought he could win except him, and fact is he did. Part of the reason, and we've spent a lot of time here at the Virtual Center playing with this particular issue, is to look at the very nature of the nation. So much of what was going on in America really tended to escape or fly below the radar, as the expression goes, of the pundits, of the pollsters, of the media. Charles Murray, the conservative philosopher and psychologist, talks about the fact that this election really constitutes shock therapy for Americans living in what he called the bubble. And then he defines what he means by the bubble: the protective barrier of prosperity and self-selected associations that increasingly shield our best and brightest from contact with the rest of their society. Basically, what he's pointing out on is that there were really two Americas. There's the America along the two coasts, where the bulk of population is concentrated in our large cities. And then there's Middle America, Red America, the predominant number of states in the middle of the continent that are far less populated, but are experiencing things that those in the bubble on the various coasts clearly missed. And the fact of the matter is, if you assume for a moment that it's real America that elected Donald Trump, then I think we can begin to understand that there's an awful lot we need to know that we missed. This particular article brings that home. If you go to yesterday's New York Times and you go specifically to David Brooks's article in the New York Times on yesterday, February 21st, basically what you're going to find in that article is a link to this commentary piece. It appears in Commentary Magazine. The date is February 15th. The author, Nicholas Eberstadt. Basically, one of the things that I think we all have to confront, and we've indeed talked about it a lot here at the Virtual Center, is that what Eberstadt calls the great American escalator, the thing that tended to drive the quality of life in America up, 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 as if the escalator would never stop going up. Each generation expected to be doing better than the previous one. That's been the theme of America's development, and there was every reason for many people to believe that it would continue. The election of Donald Trump suggests that for an awful lot of people, that escalator had broken down. They weren't going up. Things weren't getting better for them. They were angry, they were frustrated, they were confused, and they were looking for an alternative. And they found all of that in the self-assurance of Donald Trump. One of the things I like to use as a metaphor, if you will, for this bubble idea is the fact that so many people are living in a different America than so many other people. The last week that we missed when we weren't doing programs last week here at the Virtual Center, I was in New England. As I mentioned, I was visiting my brother and sister-in-law, along with my wife's son and grandchildren. One night, my brother and sister-in-law and I went out to dinner, and we had to wait for a seat in the restaurant. It was packed. And my brother made a comment that I think pretty much sums up what this is all about. And he said, everybody talks about how bad the economy is, how so many people are out of work. People can't find jobs. Their quality of life is deteriorating. He said, look at that parking lot out there. The restaurants in this area are standing room only. They're all doing a booming business. Where's all the money coming from? Well, the fact of the matter is, there are certain parts of the country that are doing well. And it creates a false sense of security. That's the bubble. And therefore, it becomes difficult to understand that other people in other parts of the country, or even within your own area, are not experiencing this bubble. There are a lot of people that can't be at that restaurant. But the fact of the matter is there are enough who can to keep the business booming. That's the issue. The first, and let me explain the structure for those who are contemplating looking at this article in commentary. Let me kind of suggest to you how it's organized, because sometimes you get into the detail and you lose the overall theme or thesis of the entire document. Eberstadt approaches these issues from two perspectives. The first one is the economy. He takes a look at the economy in the 17th year of the new millennium, of the 21st century. And then the second theme is taking a look at what's going on in the society at large. He's looking at social issues and various changes in our social fabric, in our social makeup. And the sum total of these together really explains the theme or the issue that he raises. In terms of the economy, which is about the first 40% of this particular article, he really looks at three major issues related to the economy. He says there are competing divergence between three trends, three issues related to the economy that ought to be functioning in tandem. They ought to be going together, but they're not. They're working at cross purposes. Those three are wealth, output, and jobs, employment. Then he takes each one on separately. The first is wealth. And he talks about the contradictions between these three things. Wealth being generated by the economy, the overall output being generated by the economy, and the employment growth or lack of it that's going on with the economy. If we indeed have a growing economy that truly is growing as it should grow, then all three of these things ought to be functioning together. They all ought to be going in the same direction rather than at cross purposes. As far as the first one, wealth creation, he points out that the data tells us we're off to a roaring start in the 21st century. Between early 2020 and late 2016, in the 21st century so far, the estimated net worth of American households and nonprofit institutions has more than doubled, from $44 trillion to $90 trillion. In other words, as far as the ability of the economy goes to create wealth, it is performing on all cylinders. Things couldn't be better. That's a plus. He acknowledges that this wealth is not evenly distributed, but we must recognize, he says, that this is a fantastic summary of money. In effect, it constitutes an average of over $1 million for every family of 4 in the country. That's how much wealth we're creating. If you divided the population of this country into groups of 4, then the wealth being created in this first portion of the 21st century constitutes more than $1 million per family. But obviously, it's not being distributed that way. All of this, despite the recession of 2008. The value of American real estate assets is at all-time highs. American businesses appear to be thriving. Even before the Trump rally, as we know, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the stock market is booming since Donald Trump's election. It's approaching 21,000, the Dow Jones. I think yesterday it was at 2735 or something like that. We're within a couple of hundred points of 21,000. It's only a few months ago that we were at 17 trying to reach 18. Now we're at 20, moving closer and closer to 21. Also, U.S. equity markets are hitting new highs. However, if you look at overall output in the economy, the total amount that is being produced by American workers, the picture is a lot less cheerful. The recovery from the crash of 2008, he says, has been incredibly slow and weak. The Bureau of Economic Analysis points out that it took nearly 4 years for America's gross domestic product to reattain where it was at 2007. We took such a beating in 07-08 that it took the economy 4 years to get back to where we were in 2007. It took America 6.5 years until mid-2014 to get back to its late 2007 per capita production levels. Between 2000 and 2007, the first 7 years of this new century, per capita gross domestic product growth averaged less than 1.5% per annum. That compares with 2.3% growth from the end of World War II all the way up to the year 2000. What this means is that the economy, in terms of growth domestic product, what's being produced, is functioning at only half of what it did for the previous half century from late 1940s until 2000. Since 2000, it's been operating at 1.5. Eberstadt points out that if we went back to pre-21st century growth rates, if we were still functioning at 2.3%, as we were for the last 50 years of the 20th century, that would mean in 2016 that we would be 20% higher in output per capita than it is today. In effect, there would be 10 million more people working if we were able to sustain the same output rates that we had at the end of the 20th century. What's happening then, as the Congressional Budget Office points out, is that the potential growth rate for our economy at full employment has now dropped below 1.7% a year. That's incredible. Let me make an aside or a comment at this point. This is not in Eberstadt's research. This is me talking. Much of the early projection of the Donald Trump budget that's being put together, Donald Trump is basing his budget projections on a 4% growth rate in the economy. I heard Stephen Ratner this morning on MSNBC, who's an economic expert, point out that Trump's projected 4% growth is impossible. There's no way that the economy can do that. That would be double what the economy was doing when it was booming. What that means is that Trump's programs and policies based on a 4% growth rate are they're delusional, but they're going to sound great. They are going to sound great. That's the second part of this three-part story of the economy. Wealth creation is booming. Output is operating at half of what it has traditionally operated on. Now we get to the third portion of that triumvirate: jobs. Extremely dismal. Work rates have fallen off since the year 2000 to their lowest levels in decades, Eberstadt says. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us between early 2000 and late 2016, this past year, America's overall work rate for Americans aged 20 and older underwent a drastic decline. It plunged almost 5 percentage points, from 64.6 to 59.7. Between 2008 and 2010, the loss of employment, the loss of jobs, was equal to what had previously been the country's worst post-war recession, which was in the early 1980s. In this most recent recession, the U.S. job market has yet, even in early 2017, begun to claw its way back to the work rates of 2007, and we're much, much less than we had in 2000. In other words, Americans are not working at nearly the rates that they were working in the late 20th century. They aren't even working at the rates that they were working in the first 7 years of this new century. We hear all the time. President Obama left office touting this, that America has gotten back to near full employment. The civilian unemployment rate when President Obama left office was 4.7% in December of 2016. About the same that the unemployment rate had been in 1965. The fact of the matter is, none of this takes into account workforce dropouts. The exodus out of the workforce has been the big labor market story for America's new century. For every unemployed American man between 25 and 55, there are 3 who are no longer looking for work. That means that for everybody who's looking for a job, there are 3 who stopped trying. That I would suggest, and I'm not an economist, but that I would suggest is unsustainable. 3 out of 4 working people have given up. They voted. They voted in the last election. They elected Donald Trump. As of late 2016, the adult work rate in America was at its lowest in more than 30 years. If our nation's work rate today were back to where it was at the beginning of the century in the year 2000, more than 10 million Americans would currently be working. This is astounding. 25 to 55 is considered to be the prime working age. Those are the figures we're talking about. In late 2016, work rates for this group were down almost 4 percentage points from their highs in the year 2000. It's even bad for working women. There's been a fall off in the first 15 years of this 21st century for women at the prime working age. After World War II, Eberstadt says, work rates for prime work women were surging until the year 2000. Since then, they've begun to decline. Current work rates for prime age women are back to where they were a generation ago in the 1980s. Eberstadt's conclusion on the economy: this is a terrible contradiction of economic life for what we might call America's second Gilded Age. It is a paradox that helps us understand a number of features of our new century. Basically, what it suggests is that growing majorities in America see the nation heading in the wrong direction. They're looking for change. They didn't see hope. They were angry and frustrated. And they were largely ignored by those who were secure in what Murray calls the bubble. When the pollsters polled, when the media began to do its surveys of registered voters, much of where they were surveying were people who were in the bubble, not outside of it. In other words, pollsters were talking to people who were largely shielded from the realities that a significant number of Americans were going through. But when time came to vote, those folks voted. And the results are, of course, what we are dealing with now. The second part of Eberstadt's data research piece deals with America's social fabric. It points to issues related for ordinary Americans like anxiety, dissatisfaction, anger, despair. These are the non-material. These are the things not related to the economy, not related to jobs. A number of them we knew about. Eberstadt points out the breakdown of the family. We can go all the way back to the 1960s for concerns about that. The fact that more and more people were feeling isolated in huge anonymous communities. People were concerned about an increase in secularization, about a seeming decline in faith. People weren't joining churches anymore. Fewer and fewer people were regular churchgoers. And when you look at what's happening with the family, and look at some of the other changes that were happening in our nation, same-sex marriage, transgender issues, and all the rest of it, Much of this is beyond the pale for many of our citizens. One of the reactions, or one of the issues we're dealing with, is health. All the time we hear so much about the Affordable Care Act and about Republican efforts to repeal it, and about the issues of what they're going to replace it with, and what will happen to millions of Americans if the Affordable Care Act is repealed without a replacement. These kind of issues are on everybody's lips. But the fact of the matter is, Eberstadt points out that there's all sorts of data to indicate that health conditions in America are seriously in trouble. If you want evidence, catch this one. How many of us would have predicted, Eberstadt says, that we'd live to see the day when life expectancy in East Germany was higher than it is in the United States? That's where we are. I can remember when I was growing up during the Cold War, media talked all the time about the quality of life differences between East Germany and West Germany. Quality of life in America wasn't even an issue. Now we've reached a situation where, in terms of health and life expectancy, it's greater in East Germany than it is here. There clearly has been what Eberstadt calls a positive retrogression in segments of our national population. And then he mentions the 2015 research paper by Ann Case and Angus Deaton, Nobel Economics laureate Angus Deaton, who talked about the fact that for the first time the mortality rate in America for middle-aged U.S. whites was declining. Death rates for the first time rose slightly from 2013. The interesting thing is, for non-Hispanic white men and women 45 to 55, the rates rose sharply. For those with high school degrees or less, this less educated group was experiencing the most rise in death rates, accounted for largely by suicides, chronic liver cirrhosis, drug overdoses, and other kinds of poisonings. What these researchers, Case and Deaton, concluded was that it looks like in America that white, low, or uneducated white Americans are experiencing the same kind of health challenges that Russia experienced toward the end of the Soviet Union. We used to read about Russia being overwhelmed with vodka and drug abuse. We're experiencing the same thing now. In December of 2016, 2 months ago, the Center for Disease Control reported that for the first time in decades, life expectancy at birth in the United States had dropped. The fact that it dropped at all, irrespective of how much, was, they said, statistically meaningful. As far as Human Mortality Database, an international consortium of demographers, is concerned, they compiled national data that showed that health progress in America had essentially ceased in 2012. An opioid epidemic of pain pills and heroin had taken over the country. This problem had always existed among the disadvantaged minority communities. But what the 21st century has revealed is that opioid overdose and heroin addiction had left the disadvantaged minority communities, and come to Main Street white America. By 2013, according to a report done in 2015 by the Drug Enforcement Administration, more Americans died from drug overdoses than from either traffic accidents or guns. The Ohio Department of Health reported that in one 3-month period 2 years ago, 11% of all Ohioans were on prescribed opiates. The entire nation is engulfed by this. This is a paragraph that I shared with you yesterday. Quote, "We already knew from other sources that the overwhelming majority of prime-age men in this non-working army generally don't do civil society, charitable work, religious activities, volunteering, or for that matter, much in the way of child care or help for others in the home either, despite the abundance of time on their hands. Their routine instead typically centers on watching TV, DVDs, the internet, handheld devices, etc. Indeed, watching for an average of 2,000 hours per year, as if it were a full-time job. This research basically adds a poignant and immensely sad detail to this portrait of daily life in 21st century America. In our mind's eye, we can now picture millions of non-working men in the prime of life, out of work, not looking for jobs, sitting in front of screens, stoned. OxyContin is not cheap. How is it that people who can't find jobs, whose incomes are limited, how is it that they manage in large numbers to afford a constant supply of pain medications? The answer, unfortunately, is Medicaid, the welfare state. According to Eberstadt, here's how it works, and I'm reading this verbatim. The Medicaid card pays for medicine, whatever pills a doctor deems the uninsured patient needs. Among those who receive Medicaid cards are people on state welfare or on a federal disability program known as SSI. If you could get a prescription from a willing doctor, Medicaid health insurance cards paid for that prescription every month. For a $3 Medicaid copay, addicts got pills priced at thousands of dollars, with the difference paid for by U.S. and state taxpayers. A user could turn around and sell those pills obtained for that same $3 copay for as much as $10,000 on the street. In 21st century America, Eberstadt says, dependent on government has thus come to take on an entirely new meaning. What share of prime working age men these days are enrolled in Medicaid? According to the Census Bureau's survey of income and program participation, as of 2013, over 1/5, 21%, of all civilian men between 25 and 55 years of age were Medicaid beneficiaries. 21% of all men between 25 and 55 are receiving Medicare benefits. For prime-aged people who aren't working, those who are not in the labor force, the share is over half, 53% of non-working adult males at the prime of life are on Medicaid. For non-working Anglos, not Hispanic, white men not in the labor force, the share enrolled in Medicaid, 48%. Of the entire non-working prime age population in 2013, nearly 3/5, 57%, are collecting disability benefits from one or more government disability programs as of 2013. There's no way to sugarcoat this data. There's no question. This is not an attack on Medicaid. It's basically a reality that a program created for all the right reasons is having very detrimental effects. I continue to be struck by a comment that my friend Wayne Ribich, who's frequently on the program with Bob, he's a good friend here, a former union rep here in southern West Virginia. Wayne makes the point, and all through the political campaign that was going on this past fall, I heard him make this point over and over again. You would be surprised at how many of our drug problems, alcohol problems, heroin problems, spouse abuse problems, child abuse problems would disappear if people could find jobs, meaningful jobs with benefits, meaningful jobs that came with hope. If people could work, many of these other things would disappear. We don't need programs aimed at addressing these problems as much as we need jobs, meaningful jobs. Wayne used to say all the time. One other reality that I think this data shows deals with crime. What we see and what we don't see. What we see is that the data is indicating that the crime wave that people talk about is in fact just the opposite from what it appears. Rates for violent crime and property crimes have dropped by about 2/3 over the past 2 decades. Just this morning, I listened to a discussion about Donald Trump's efforts to sell the idea that this nation is a hotbed of crime, that crime is rampant, that citizens, African Americans in our inner cities, and he points to Chicago and the number of shooting deaths in Chicago for evidence. Donald Trump is suggesting that crime rates in this country are escalating, when in fact the data shows that just the opposite is true. And the discussion I heard this morning suggests that Donald Trump might be setting himself up for a problem. But he obviously is able to handle problems better than any politician I've ever seen. But what they were saying is, if crime rates were to go up, after he's already talking about the nation being victimized by rampant crime, if crime rates were to go up, then it would take him a lot of explaining in order to talk his way out of it. What they're pointing out is that crime rates are currently so low that they could realistically increase, which would cause him problems. I would suggest to you that that same thing might work in reverse. But what Eberstadt talks about is not so much the crime rates as the rate of incarceration in this country. The size of the population either sentenced to prison or convicted of some sort of felony offense. Every effort is being made because of the costs to release nonviolent offenders, because we can't afford to keep them incarcerated. We still have more than 2 million men in prison in this country. But the point is that we're dealing with a reality that 90% of all sentenced felon, all those people sentenced for a felony, are on the street. We know the difficulty of finding a job for anybody with a record. Employers are paranoid about that. If you have a felony on your record, you're going to be very hard put to find a job. At the rates that we've been arresting people and convicting them of felonies, we've got a huge segment of the American population who are laboring under the burden of trying to find work in a society where jobs are disappearing and will never be available for people with a felony on their records. Eberstadt points out that a Democratic study being conducted by Sarah Shannon and other researchers estimates that when all the numbers are compiled, former felons in America may reach as many as 20 million convicted felons who are in search of jobs or have given up looking for jobs in the United States. This is a broken 20 million man army. 1 in 8 adult males in America today. These people, Eberstadt says, are effectively living in darkness. They have become statistical outcasts. They are not figured into the numbers. They aren't taken into consideration. Yet they're out there and they continue to pull social mobility downward. And then we have social mobility itself, the elevator that we could always depend on, has broken down. This is Eberstadt's study. The data is incredible. It kind of suggests the challenges we have to turn the economy around. We have got to find ways to readmit these people into production, into productive elements in our society. That, I would suggest, is our challenge. We've reached the end of our program. I kind of had to rush at the end there in order to get done. We're right at the top of the hour. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I hope you have a great weekend, a great evening. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back together on Monday. For Bob Kincaid and the folks at Head On, for Bob and Annette and the rest, thank you so very much for your continued support of the network and of this program. Thank you.